Hello, I'm Mercedes Stephenson, and this is the West Block Politics, Perspectives, and Players. There's been a lot of talk this week about finances, whether the government will abandon its fiscal anchors and potentially spend tens to hundreds of billions more, changing the way Canadians are governed and Canadian social programs. On top of that, there has been significant spending to date by Canada's government to deal with the pandemic. There, of course, is a watchdog who tracks all of that, and he joins us now. He is Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux. Thank you so much for joining me, sir.
My pleasure.
So the first question that I want to talk to you about is one that's been out there in the media a lot this week, and it's only speculation at this point, but the government has indicated they want transformational change. There have been rumors that they are going to, quote unquote, abandon their fiscal anchors, that as much as another $100 billion could be spent. Do you think that Canada can sustain or afford more significant government spending?
Well, Canada was before the pandemic in a relatively good fiscal situation. Of course, the pandemic changed things significantly with a sharp reduction in revenues and the necessary spending that was required to sustain Canadian households and businesses. So, which leads to a forecasted deficit this year of well over $300 billion. So, if we were to add significant amounts to that, it would probably be sustainable as long as all the other supports that were temporary in nature are indeed temporary. So we can, but it's clearly, it's without a doubt that we cannot afford deficits of over $300 billion for more than just a few years. And when I say a few years, I really mean a year or two. Beyond that, it would become unsustainable. So if the government has plans for additional spending, it will clearly have to make difficult choices, either raise taxes or reduce other areas of spending, because it's clear that we cannot afford to have deficits of that magnitude for even the medium term.
So if the government were, say, to end some of the programs that are out there right now, but put that money into something like universal basic income or childcare, would they run into that same issue of long-term sustainability?
Very likely. It depends on, of course, on the nature of these programs. You can have a universal basic income with various parameters that can be relatively, and I mean relatively, less expensive than others, or you can go big and have programs that will cost easily $100 billion, depending on how generous you want your universal basic income to be. So the proverbial devil is in the details, and that's what really makes or breaks the fiscal sustainability of the country. It's how generous you want to be with these programs. So we can speculate about whether or not the government's intentions will make finances unsustainable or not, but I think it's much safer to wait for the details. But again, what's clear is that the current level of deficit is not sustainable, even in the medium term.
Is it concerning to you that there's no plan at this point for how this money is going to be paid back?
What's concerning is the absence of a longer term plan. So the government provided a fiscal snapshot early in July, but we don't know what are the government's intentions beyond the current fiscal year. And that is concerning to me and to most people who are concerned about public finances, because it's one thing to be spending to support Canadians and businesses during a crisis. And I think there's virtually nobody that disagrees that this was needed. But what people and credit rating agencies, financial markets, and Canadians are waiting to see is what is the government's plans to get out of that crisis, and what are public finances likely to look like in the next year and in the next couple of years. So what are the government's plans once the pandemic is behind us? Are we still going to run into big deficits, or is the plan to return to balanced budgets? And if the government plans on launching new programs, will that be financed by cuts elsewhere or increase in taxes? So we don't know that, and that's what is concerning to me.
How transparent do you think that the government has been in terms of accountability with the programs and the spending so far?
Well, the government has been transparent when it comes to indicating to Canadians the cost of the programs, the emergency programs so far, with notably the Department of Finance releasing updates every 2 weeks to the Finance Committee. What is not clear, as I said, is what are the plans going forward. So government has been relatively transparent on expenditures looking back. So the costs of programs that have been launched and the cost of these programs to date, but it hasn't been transparent regarding its intentions going forward. It was understandable early in the pandemic because we were all in crisis mode, reacting to the situation. But as the crisis is evolving and we are in months 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of this crisis, I think it's reasonable for Canadians to expect more from the government in terms of what's the plan going forward.
Aaron O'Toole, the new leader of the Conservative Party, says that he would try to pay the debt and the deficit that the government is digging itself into down within 10 years. How realistic do you think a plan is to come back to budget like Aaron O'Toole is putting out there and supporting within the next decade, which is the time frame he's giving?
Well, 10 years is a very long time frame in politics as well as in public finances. So it depends on the choices that would be made. Would the government decide to cancel some of the temporary measures that have been launched during the pandemic? Would there be some other adjustments to the government spending plans or to taxation? So it depends on a variety of factors, but returning to balance over a 10-year horizon is not something that is unrealistic. If we go back to the mid 1990s, Canada was faced with structural deficits that were very important, and the government of the day was able to return to balanced budgets and in fact reduce taxes significantly within a couple of years. So that was unthinkable back then. And it was done in less than 10 years. So it's not unrealistic at all to go from these levels of deficits that we're experiencing right now to balanced budgets in a 10-year life or time span. Sorry.
Okay, Yves Giroux, thank you so much for joining me today.
A pleasure, as always.